Charles, welcome to Sunday.
Oh, it's a pleasure to see you again, Jason, on Sunday as opposed to on Monday.
Exactly. I think we may have a little bit wider of a shot than normal, but that's all right.
Want me to move back? Or?
No need. That wasn't meant to prompt you to do anything.
All right, good.
But, Charles, I think people are excited to see you back on Sunday, back in the regular time slot. And we've got an image today. This is a movie that people say is the highest grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation. And there's no superheroes, there's no exploding robots. It's kind of surprising.
It was actually, I remember seeing it for the first time in a movie theater, and I thought it was really fantastic. This is before I knew I had any connection to the American South. And it really is, once again, this art department. I mean, I don't know, we can't ask for more raises at this point. You just got to give them shares of ownership or whatever. But they do such fantastic job week after week, show after show.
Yeah.
It's really something.
The raises, Charles, come from the generous sponsors of the program, and I've said it many times, part of what we're trying to do with Crowdsource the Truth is change the business model of how news and information really are delivered. It doesn't seem to me that there can be an impartial presentation of information if somebody rich is paying a ton of money for the presentation. By breaking it out into hundreds or hopefully even thousands of micro sponsorships where the viewers are paying even as low as $1 or $2 or $5 a month, it just alleviates any kind of major financial burden from any one individual, and it also removes any undue financial influence that a sponsor could otherwise have. So we're hopeful that more people will go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become sponsors.
I think it's very important for obviously for the reasons you raised, but beyond that, when we look at the quality of news that is found at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, forget the networks and even now cable.
It's all bad.
I've experienced as really an amateur in the news business. Now I've been at this since 2007, and I have experienced. I'm not bragging or anything, but I have interacted across the world with many different providers of supposedly providers of news. And what I find is that the first chilling impact is the role of the editor. Now the editor at most of these organizations tends to be a very young person who does not have the life experience required to understand that what we're going through here, particularly in the recent period, 2016 forward, is a gigantic movement, sudden, sharp movement in the tectonic plates that underlie the geopolitical system in the globe. Yeah. And if you're just 27 years old, I mean, you're more interested in the weekend and the evening and whatever than really studying up and forgetting what the professors may have told you and what you told them to get your A in journalism school. And most of these people, in addition, I've noticed, they're just challenged thinking about math. And if you're trying to understand this is what we've been going through and you don't get math, you should pick something else to do because you're not going to get to the bottom of this thing. So I think what you're doing here is novel, and I enjoy participating with you in it. And I also think it's impactful.
Thank you.
I believe we're getting, I haven't checked the stats with you recently, but the last time we went through it, you get viewers all over the world, and hello to you all over the world. Thanks for tuning in wherever you may be. And many of these viewers stay with us for quite a long time in a broadcast, which is unusual, I'm told, by colleagues I know in different aspects of the media.
Yeah, it's been going really well. Things are growing. I think there's not too much doubt that it's somehow being suppressed. Our shows used to regularly get 30, 40, even 60,000 views in a matter of a week or two, and now it's down to around 10,000 and even lower. So I'm curious to know what's going on. President Trump, of course, announced some sort of web page where you can report social media censorship. I saw, just looking at a TV as I was walking by, somebody had CNN on, and they said, the latest lie from the White House about social media censorship. I don't know if we're going to get into that, but CNN is just so
Chicken noodle news.
Chicken noodle news. I want to apologize to our viewers on D Live, Charles. There's something of a technical problem preventing D Live from actually being on the air right now, I think a lot of people know that you and I are on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and VK.com. DLive is one of the platforms that I like to try to use, but for some reason it disconnected a few days ago, and I'm not sure why it hasn't reconnected yet. So people can watch us on all these other channels, and that's why I like to diversify the platforms, try out these different technologies and things like that. But you've created yet another gripping presentation for us today. Should we go right into it?
I think we should. Dive right into it.
There you go.
So what actually has been happening, and you're not going to hear this at MSNBC for sure, or CNN, and possibly to a lesser extent at Fox. What's been happening here, and what we've been doing, you and I have been doing, is laying out evidence that we saw this literally years ago, and giving people the opportunity to go back and now catch up and see what we have seen, what we've shared. But what's happened, I think, and we're going to get into this in some depth today, is that the status quo, the cronies in both political parties, thought they were going to pull yet another fast one and put in polite phrase is a malleable CEO, and a better way of describing Hillary Clinton is as a corrupt fool as president. And then, because there's so much dirt on the Clintons, the cronies, again, in both parties, thought that they would be in a position, Hillary could fly around the world and do what she wants with her meetings, but on key decisions, we're just going to call the shots, and nobody's going to know that we're really the puppeteers. That's what they thought they were going to get away with. That's what so many people realized was not going to be the case on early in the morning after Election Tuesday, 2016. And ever since then, a collection of people who thought they had rigged in the election and were setting themselves up for untold billions or hundreds of billions of dollars of riches, suddenly they realized that they could actually go to prison.
That would be so good. For
a long time and lose all their money and stand in history exposed and outed for the crooks and thieves that they are. And so that's why they've been fighting so hard for so long.
Yeah.
And as a guess, one clue for me that made me very optimistic that Trump was going to actually win, or I should say that Hillary was going to lose, is when they canceled that Grucci fireworks display a couple of days before the election. I figured that was not because they were pinching pennies. That was because they had to.
I didn't realize they did that before.
They did, yeah. They
How did they know before the election?
Well, because I'm sure some people went and looked at this and said, "Now wait a minute, these, the idea."
There's only one thing that's going to blow up on election night, and it's not these fireworks.
Right. Yeah, and so probably not the best move to be setting off fireworks on the day that you lose.
Yeah.
So when I saw that happen, I was very encouraged. But right away. The people behind the Clintons and the Obamas realized, holy shit, we have got to cover our tracks, and we may not succeed in covering our tracks. So that's why they trotted Hillary and Bill out wearing a purple tie and purple dress, and the resistance movement. That's why they tried to get electors not to cast their votes, and then these challenges and all. They've been buying time, and that does happen when you face a crisis. One natural human reaction is to say, okay, I'm going to stall for time.
Right.
I can't figure it out today. I'll figure it out tomorrow.
Maybe the other people involved will die or something.
Somehow, yeah, exactly. But so that's a process that we've been, you and I started doing this together in June of 2017, really the month after Comey was gone and Mueller was appointed. And so that was, the appointment of Mueller was, I think, the first visible attempt to really go after Trump. And they thought they had that cooked. They nearly accomplished their objective. They certainly rigged, I would argue, the 2018 election, because Mueller for certain knew, and the people on his staff for certain knew, that there was no conspiracy or collusion way before November 2018. Yeah.
Maybe like June 2017.
Like the day they were appointed, they knew
exactly.
that, right?
They were like, where's the bar tab around?
Exactly.
Now, Charles, one thing I think people really enjoy seeing on this show, because when I have Mike Moore on and Larry Klayman on and even Larry Nichols, a lot of people have maybe arguably pretty negative outlooks, thinking that nothing will happen, nobody will go to jail.
Right.
You're always very positive, and it's one thing that I really appreciate about you. And it's not just, Pollyanna type, flowers and bunnies.
Right.
Your analysis always has a tendency, I think, to lean towards the positive outcome. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about exactly why you're enthusiastic now that some of these big, obviously Trump tweeted, I think this morning or yesterday, that, treason and long jail sentences, it's a pretty big deal for him to tweet that, right?
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a second. It's a good question. Trump has actually been very smart thinking through how to communicate, not just with his supporters, but to communicate writ large with the world. And I remember all these insiders were saying, you shouldn't tweet, take his cell phone away from him, he's an idiot for doing that, he's only going to get in trouble. And no, he long ago figured out that he did not need to sell his message through the filters of people who hate him in the mainstream media.
Right.
And people who are basically going to concoct fake news out of whatever he said. So he wisely built up a massive Twitter presence before the election.
Is he the most followed guy on Twitter? I think he is.
Is he now, really?
I think maybe. I don't know.
He may well be. But so when I got into this in the beginning, I had the benefit of the lessons learned from looking into GE, which was a smaller target than obviously this is, but nonetheless, it was a big target. And what I learned there, drawing on previous episodes of my life, is before you take on a fight, Katy Perry's big. Wow.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's a shocking list of who are the most followed on Twitter.
How far down? Where's Mini AOC on the list? Is she?
I don't know.
She must be climbing.
Mini AOC is hilarious.
Yeah.
Justin Bieber is above the President of the United States. And YouTube, amazing.
And Ariana Grande. Oh, there's Donald Trump, 60 million followers. So he's number
13. Unlucky for some.
It's actually a lucky number for me. He's just beat out Selena Gomez.
And Britney Spears, who apparently has gone crazy.
And Twitter itself.
Or remains crazy. Wow, more followers than Twitter itself. That is good.
Yeah. So back on why you asked me why would I be so positive about this. So what I like to do before I get into a fight like this is to be reasonably sure of my ground. And I did a lot of work on this starting in February of 2015 and ran my ideas by a lot of people who would have been quick to shoot them down if I were wrong. So when I went through that vetting process, the long vetting process, I realized that I had something here that was interesting. And with the passage of time, after all, I started on this, 4 years and 4 months ago, almost 4 years and 3 months ago. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And I've said a lot about it in writing and on air and radio and TV and podcasting. And so people have had an opportunity to come to me and say, hey, you're wrong. And that hasn't happened. Now, that doesn't mean I may not have made a mistake or two on this project, but as to substance, I think it is a large, if not the largest set of unprosecuted frauds ever attempted in the world. And then when I thought through and saw an opportunity to get money back for aggrieved donors, I realized that it's going to take time, and fortunately we have the time for the moment. But let's tell the story, and let's get people engaged in the process. Let's make it a group effort, which is what you do here in Crowdsource the Truth. It's a good approach, so that people can really feel rightfully that they have a role in exposing this and a role in changing the status quo for the better. So it's a good project.
Yeah, and I think it's important that people understand that it's, we are crowdsourcing information, but it's not a democracy per se. You and I, with particular regard to this show, are sort of the gatekeepers of information and which direction we go in. For instance, right now,
whoa, what was that?
I don't know what that was. For right now, several people in the comments are demanding that I release naked pictures of Hillary Clinton, which...
That's weird.
Well, I don't have that. I don't want that. Who would want that? And we're not doing that. So no matter how many crowdsource requests we get for that, that's not what happens.
That's right. That ain't going to happen.
No,
that's
not
going to happen.
But of course, people are contacting you, Charles, through your website and through Twitter. And there's lots of good information coming that way for people who aren't yet following you. They can do that. You're on there. at Charles Ortel. You are quickly catching up to Selena Gomez.
I don't think so. I'm not trying to.
35.2, that's very good. Some sort of a clamp seems to have been at least loosened back on the moving upward kind of position with regard to Twitter, so that's good.
Good. Great. So what I was starting to say, Jason, is that I think what's happened here is that Donald Trump and the team in his administration, particularly the IRS, Justice Department, and elsewhere, as a guess, have been watching what we're doing and what other people are doing, and have been doing their homework, and have finally seen an opportunity to do something about it.
Good.
And one of the reasons that I'm so patient with this is I realized early on that this wasn't just about the Clintons. This is more about why the Obama administration allowed all of this to happen. And beyond that, why the George W. Bush administration allowed the Clinton crimes that we're going to talk about at the very opening of their foundation to remain kept under the rug. You know, why Comey and Rosenstein and Mueller, who supposedly at various points from 2001 to 2005 were investigating this obvious fraud, when I realized that they didn't see it, I realized this had to be a lot more than about just the Clinton Foundation. It's about, you know, who are the real puppet masters in Washington, D.C.?
Well, and it fits right into a question that we're getting right now from B. Pinkerton. Wants to know if you think that the Clinton Foundation is a CIA money laundering front.
I think that the loosely, in quotes, loosely controlled international U.S. charities that operate internationally are perfect vehicles for laundering money, whether it be for the CIA or similar agencies or for other parties. I mean, they're perfect vehicles. Well, I've been told by some of the world's experts in money laundering that there is actually a market for turning dirty money into clean money, and the fee involved ranges from 20 to 30%.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar worldwide market.
Right. So, you know, you're sitting there and you want to turn dirty Pakistani money into, you know, clean New York City apartments or whatever. A vehicle is to arrange to donate money to a charity, and then, you know, you don't check terribly carefully. Does the charity really spend the money it says it's spending on overhead? Did they really make the grant? Did the currencies really move the way they allege? And of course, you bring in a ridiculous accounting firm, which has changed its name. Have you heard?
BKD changed its name?
Yeah, it's now called BAD.
They should just call it Truman Accounting.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Truman no show. But so yeah, it's certainly possible that this Clinton Foundation might have been used. I suspect, and in time we'll probably find out. We've done many shows where I pointed out in the fine print on these filings for the Clinton Health Access Initiative and other things. For some reason, in 2009 and 10, the Clinton Foundation magically opened up a whole bunch of offices across North Africa and the Middle East,
Wow.
which then magically closed.
Oh.
And there's not really a lot of discussion about that. And of course, I'm not at all suspicious that maybe what those offices were being used for was to foment the uprisings that we call the Arab Spring when she was Secretary of State.
Wow.
That didn't occur to me, but it did occur to me. The fact that Mohammed Morsi's top person who's currently rotting in an Egyptian prison, I think for 20 years, the Muslim Brotherhood spokesperson for Morsi, had previously, his name is Ghaddad el-Haddad, and he had previously been the head of the Egyptian, the Cairo office for the Clinton Foundation, which doesn't really ever get any explanation. So I don't know whether it's the CIA or, you know, some other.
Well, very probably people in the CIA, like John Brennan or whatever, are able to benefit from it. I mean, you know, we've got all these weird connections where people leave the CIA, they go into private companies. I've been learning about what John Deutsch did through the 90s and the 2000s,
Right.
ex-CIA guy who went to Schlumberger and some other companies doing all kinds of weird things. So even if it's just a private money laundering thing for criminal individuals, it does seem that the resources and people from the CIA are somehow using their capabilities to protect it.
Right, it's got to stop. I mean, this charity land is a place where millions of Americans benefit from whether they work inside them or they're the recipients of charity, and millions of people around the world benefit, many millions of people benefit from the good works of the well-run and tightly controlled charities. This, on the other hand, is a seething, cauldron of corruption. I mean, and this is something that has been going on now for over 20 years, and it's got to stop, and we've got to tell the world what was really going on. And the people who went from being bankrupt, the Clintons, to now being worth who knows how many $100 million, need to give all that money back and spend time in prison.
I would love that.
Well, I think many, and not just them. I mean, Barack Obama, I personally, and not threatened, but I personally asked for an opportunity to speak to the General Counsel and received an opportunity to speak to the legal staff of the Barack Obama Foundation to warn them, that they were going down the wrong path and they better not continue after Trump won.
And they Charles, has Robert Mueller called you yet?
I know, right? And they certainly have not listened to me. So I think what's going to happen here is the Democratic Party, the Democrats are going to, and Republicans are going to make decisions here that may limit the extent to which the public finds out about, how many people committed crime. But one price that will be paid here is that it'll kind of be like Waleed in Saudi Arabia. His father was allowed to come back into Saudi Arabia from exile, but his family was never allowed into politics again. I think that's going to happen to the Clintons. It has happened to the Clintons, I think, and to the Obamas, and to the Bushes. Wow. I think that's going to be one price that's going to be paid here. And then I also think, and I would encourage, look at the crap that Donald Trump has taken over a foundation that he funded with his money, and it made mistakes, and it was punished. But we're talking about $25 million fine or something like that for a $20 million foundation. Here you're talking about $3.2 billion in known contributions. You're talking about a family that was destitute, that should have been, Bill Clinton should have been convicted. Had he been convicted, he'd probably be swapping tall tales back in, he probably wouldn't have survived. He'd go back to Arkansas and, not eat well, and, probably wouldn't have survived his first heart attack. But, here this guy and this family have gone from, nearly from financial ruin in the White House, technical financial ruin, to being global celebrities, not a care in the world. Chelsea can't bother with, she doesn't understand why people want to make money, because all she has to do is just, say, I need some money. And, a big fancy townhouse shows up, or a co-op shows up, or a vacation shows up. So I think this is going to change. I don't know, I'm not a good predictor of how much time it will take. It could go, as Hemingway's character said, how do you go bankrupt? Slowly, then suddenly. This has been slow, and the change could be swift. But what we are seeing, we're going to talk about this a little bit in some more depth, we are seeing around the world, remember when the Trump phenomenon happened, all the hoity-toity pundits and mainstream media and stuff were saying, oh, populism, that's crazy stuff. Who would be a populist today? Who would be a nationalist?
Cascading
around the world. People are saying, you know what? These windbags who are going, who speak banalities at these global circuses, this fancy resort after that fancy city, and these presidential suites and these fancy banquets and stuff. These windbags have been talking shit and spending trillions, putting those debts on the backs of our children and grandchildren, and it's got to stop. And people are growing to appreciate it. I was on with people today from Norway, and Norway was a hard left globalist country a year ago, and that's beginning to change rapidly. Italy has changed. UK, I think, is surging. France, there's developments. You're going to see Australia just moved. We're going to talk about that in some depth. So it's not a crazy idea to have a strong nation enforce its laws and promote its customs, its distinctive customs, inside its own boundaries. There's nothing strange about that. What is, excuse my language for saying it this way, but it's fucking stupid is to say, well, no, we're not going to take the biggest economy in the world and turn control of that over to faceless bureaucrats around the world who are just trying to rip us off and destroy our identity. We're not going to do that as the largest country in the world. It makes no sense whatsoever. And yet, that's what the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas were all too ready to do. That's what they saw as genius. It's an evolution, to destroy your country.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for me.
No, I agree, Charles. And, I saw an interesting, along the lines of fake news wanting to destroy the country. There was a headline on the New York Times, I think this morning, that was saying, Trump backs down on some tariffs or sanctions or something. But then you got to read down in there to see that he had negotiated to get, I think, Canada and Mexico to buy more farm products from the U.S. So he wasn't backing down. That's the negotiation. He says, we're going to have tariffs unless you guys buy more. He's evening out these trade imbalances.
I would rather read the instructions for bacitracin than read the New York Times at this stage.
Right.
What's the point of reading the New York Times? It's all wrong.
Dollop.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
Bacitracin.
Maybe we should just go to the next one. And to your new viewers, people who have not seen this before, this is not the fact-free zone that you find at CNN and MSNBC and elsewhere. All of the work we do here is work that is grounded in slides with links on them that are available for free. And in a bit, when we get the playlist up, we might... I had somebody complain about not being able to find the slides, and I was not at my computer, so I couldn't really do it.
Well, it's pretty easy. Pretty much all the shows have got links to slides, and what we've done is, of course, we've spoken about it many times, we've got the playlist here that people can go and retrieve from the Jason Goodman YouTube channel. That's the original home of Crowdsource the Truth. And for any of the videos that we've done, Charles, when people click on the YouTube video...
Do it slowly, do it slowly.
Okay, so if you're watching the video, this is maybe the confusing part for people. There's this little...
over here.
There's a thing that says show more right here that you have to click, perhaps, but it's this description of the video section that has the link. It always says download Charles's presentation, and then you click on that and it should take you right to the corresponding PDF file that you can download to your computer or go through as you watch the show, however you want to do it.
Yeah. That's great. Believe it or not, I used to be, get in trouble for saying this, but I used to be a slave to printing out drafts and then marking them up.
Yeah.
I have not done that once for these presentations. It's all been electronic. I haven't, I don't think I've ever printed out.
Well, you're saving paper.
Yeah, saving, that's right.
That's your Green New Deal.
That's my Green New Deal.
It's a good thing that we've got 12 years left. You better enjoy all those printouts while you can.
That's right. I'm not even going to charge you $93 trillion for it.
That's right.
But what we try to do here, and we pitch the show to the prosecutors and the investigators, the government officials, people who are familiar and comfortable with thinking about laws and regulations and accounting and numbers. We try to go over. Today's going to be a case where we're going to be going over some important numbers. It's actually more in the nature today, we're going to be revealing magic tricks with numbers, because we're going to show you that the ways in which people who have some experience looking at numbers can immediately discern that accounting figures are invented as opposed to real. We're going to show you how to do that. But here, the basic approach is to give you all links to the slides. If you have concerns, you think we've made a mistake or not appreciated a nuance, please get in touch with me via my site, via Twitter, and you'll be able to figure out my email if you go through my site. And when you do that, please try to keep your concerns short. I'm not in a position to read unsolicited 20-page, issues or more. I can't do that. But if you have a point you want to make in 100 words, 250 words, I definitely will read it. I'll definitely get right back to you. And if it's something that I've missed or it's wrong, I really appreciate that the most. So again, this is an interchange. You can actually make a big difference out there, not only by supporting Jason's effort here financially and otherwise, but by referring your friends, saying, hey, take a look at this. You're so sure about the Clintons, why don't you take a look at this guy's stuff? Yeah. And if you think he's wrong, to watch an hour of one of these shows And if after that you still think the Clintons are hunky-dory, then go and see a psychiatrist.
Yeah, and if anybody knows that lady that ripped the cell phone out of my hands when I was trying to ask Bill Clinton a question, email it to her.
Right, exactly.
Ask her WTF.
Right. So what we're going to do today, we're just going to spend one slide, the next slide, talking about a few things that are quite interesting. In the first one, this is a story by, I think, the great Andrew McCarthy, who really is, I think he's a former prosecutor, and it's a lengthy piece. We're not going to try to go through even much of it, but just to characterize it, it describes complete bungling incompetence. You know, the kind of incompetence that in government that underscores my view we really need to change the protection racket that is the network of public sector unions that allow for the present problem where these people are very highly paid when you count their pensions. They generally, there doesn't seem to be much turnover when they make lots of mistakes, and they gum up the works. They are, you know, crucial elements of the swamp. And this is a long story that goes through all the many mistakes that were made by under Mueller and Weissman that were allowed to happen. And no career people stood up and said, wait a minute, you can't do this crap. You know, you guys know that there's no reason for a FISA warrant here. You know, this Steele dossier is complete garbage. And they knew it. And they went back time after time. They were turned down several times. Ultimately, they get a warrant on the basis of fraudulent evidence. This is a special, you know, counsel who's brought in because, you know, you can't trust the Justice Department. We better get, you know, Mr. Holier-than-thou Mueller away from the bar to try to, not the kind where lawyers work generally. Yeah. It's just a tale of such horrible behavior that in any well-run business, and I'm not even talking, I mean, even at GE you'd probably get fired for doing this. But in a well-run business, you would not tolerate this, and yet, you know, we invested as Americans enormous power in the Department of Justice. They decide who gets prosecuted, who doesn't. Dopey James Comey got up there in the middle of an election and said, no reasonable prosecutor, not on the take to the Clintons, would would decide to prosecute the Clintons. I mean, it's a ridiculous performance here, and still we have, you know, Brian Stelter over at CNN and Jake Tapper at CNN and Rachel Mad, not Maddow, just Mad, you know, spewing venom.
Spewing.
Exactly, just spewing venom and to the 6 people who are still watching CNN. I mean, it's crazy land.
Well, 6 on CNN, 6 on MSNBC.
It's the same 6. They have 2 televisions.
Right.
So then we've learned, though, this is an article which this guy, John Durham, and this is a new thing, the National Sentinel. I've been noticing quite a few stories popping up and creeping into Free Republic and elsewhere. I like the way they write so far, but they and others are claiming that this John Durham has been hunting into this since early October 2018. So for 7 months. I mean, that's fantastic if true.
Well, there was some testimony. I had seen
It's this story,
Yeah. A little exchange with Jim Jordan and some of the other people.
October 3rd,
Right.
Yep. But anyway, this is a story people should read and think about and then circulate, and grounds for optimism in my view.
Right.
We go back to the...
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. And then here's another one from the same National Sentinel. I wonder what it is. That what these various people were doing. Remember, Obama is now out of office when this division is going on, and nobody was asking questions at the time. I was. I mean, nobody in the mainstream was asking, why were Valerie Jarrett and the Obamas living in the same house after Trump? You know, and now that's odd. I mean, people do stuff that's odd from time to time, but you know, I'll give you a simple reason. There was a lot of evidence that needed to be destroyed, and you couldn't call somebody up in a Trump presidency and say, hey, Do you think we should keep this? Should we lose that? Should we bleach bit that? Do you think Hillary has any extra bleach bit left? That we
Yeah.
could, you know, far better to go to one place with all the incriminating evidence.
It is weird that she would live there, right? They're all like extremely wealthy people. It's not like they're college students who are trying to save money living in the same house.
Right. It's just a little bit weird, and a lot bit weird. And, you know, this idea that you would be conspiring to bring down a sitting president. I mean, think of what would have happened if George W. Bush had, you know, gone and with his wife Laura to live in the same house in Washington D.C. with, you know, Karl Rove. You know, you think anybody at the Washington Post would have written a few stories about that? The New York Times, you know, and really here, what I think we're gonna see is the full extent to which, or much of the extent to which, the scandal-free administration was anything but.
Yeah.
It was scandal central. And then here we have this guy Comey. I mean, he must realize that you know, he's going to be facing jail time here.
Wow.
But to stand
sliming his own department.
I mean, this is, I think it's a self-incriminating comments.
I think he's losing it. Like, this doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. Nor does his contention that he once voted as a communist, Comey.
Comey said that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's what qualified him to be head of the FBI.
Well, it's interesting, though, because joking aside, I mean, this kind of ties them all in some way to the Weather Underground, which Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are very closely tied to. How are all these guys in the FBI and the CIA down with communism?
It just, they shouldn't be, and the fact that, I mean, anybody who is fairly considered facts that are available in the public domain and can be verified, the record of communist regimes, anybody who is fairly considered that and decides to vote for communism, again, needs to go directly to the psychiatrist. And you know, it's just it's ridiculous. Even if you're poor, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So,
not good.
Not at all. Then we have this story about Mr. Baker, James Baker, no relation to the Bush cabinet member James Baker, but apparently we're starting to see elements of the cabal spread apart. Mm-hmm. And this guy is trying to suggest that he was negative on the Steele dossier, and you know, we're going to find out the truth. Just the same way that there are missing emails, there are missing internal FBI and Justice Department memoranda that people are going to find. And I'll bet on Mr. Durham to find them. And who knows what Huber, people say he's been doing nothing. I wonder about that. It's kind of tough to do nothing. I mean, he's after all, he's not George Costanza on Seinfeld, you know, those jobs where he's doing nothing. I mean, there are a lot of people in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a lot of prosecutors and people out there in Utah. And if he really was just doing nothing and pretending to investigate this, then it's time for the people to know that.
James Comey is such a dope here.
Yeah.
An AG must act like the leader. It's like, why is he telling everybody what to do? He should be shutting up.
And this is on the anniversary, of course, of the 2-year anniversary, May 17th, of Mueller being appointed.
Oh, really?
He's trying to be, you know, he thinks he's being super clever, and, you know, all these absurd visuals on his tweets and comments and references. I mean, this guy, you know, he's not going to even make, he's a lousy lawyer who's going to make a worse jailhouse lawyer in a little while.
He's not going to do well in jail. I think I've shown you this image, right, Charles? The world's most expensive nothing burger being ordered by Robert Mueller with a scotch.
Exactly.
That's good.
You should have a whole bottle. So this story here in American Greatness, we've done that. Next one down.
Oh, sorry.
It's a point I'd like to just spend a few minutes on. On the one hand, we have a lot of chatter about, you know, oh, this woe is me, the Steele dossier, how could that have passed muster? That's a fair set of arguments to consider. But a more interesting set of arguments to consider in my mind is you have, I mean, we had Russia call up the FBI when Mueller was running it, I think, either Mueller or Comey, and saying, you got a problem with the Tsarnaev brothers based on our, we don't like each other, but we don't want, you've got these people living in your country who are going to do you harm, and we suggest you think about interviewing them and do what you want, but that's our solid to you. So what does the FBI do? They send, I don't know, Abbott and Costello out to interview the Tsarnaev brothers and conclude there's no threat, and then they blow up the Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon. Then, in a similar case, and I accept that there are going to be lots of people who will walk into Washington, D.C., into field offices of the FBI, and foreign powers will come with tips, and you don't just take a tip because somebody brings it to you, even if they're highly credible. But in the case of something that's in the FBI vault file, we've done numerous shows about it. In early January 2016, a senior State Department official sent a detailed, registered letter to James Comey saying, I'm a veteran with a high security clearance. I believe that I have assembled evidence of Hillary Clinton mishandling classified information to the detriment of our country, in league with multiple associates of hers, and I want to go into a skiff, and I want to brief you, Comey, about what I know. Please respond to this letter. He didn't even do that. So this patriot, we'll find out eventually who this patriot is, goes in mid-January 2016. The primaries are just starting. Bernie has a chance at this point to be the nominee, and meets with these field agents in the Washington, D.C. field office. There's transcripts in the FBI vault files of the meeting summary, and then there's actually unredacted portions. Some portions are redacted, but major unredacted portions of the original letter sent to Comey are there for us all to see. And what does the FBI do? Nothing. And this is January 2016. You have, in theory, a maturing FBI investigation that was opened on July 10th, 2015 into the mishandling of classified information. You have an inside source at the State Department providing evidence and offering to provide more in color. And what does Comey do? Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Hey, I'm busy.
I want Hillary in as president because, I now have what you sent me, and I'll just use that against her. I'm either going to use it against Hillary if she wins, or I'll use it against Trump if, God forbid, he wins. That's the way I think Comey was thinking. That may be the way Stroke and others were thinking, and McCabe. That may be the way hardened members of the Justice Department, who are still perhaps there, were thinking, and in the IRS, and that is not right. That is just not the way it's supposed to work. If the Justice Department, the FBI is supposed to investigate, the Justice Department is supposed to make decisions about prosecuting based on the likelihood of winning convictions. The IRS is supposed to make sure, without regard to political affiliation, that people are paying their fair share, their required taxes. People and persons and corporations are paying their taxes. But when you start running any government as an exercise, the party that wins gets to persecute the parties that are out of power, that is not a game we're going to play in the United States anymore. I don't think anybody should be for that, particularly given the track record that's in front of us.
Yeah.
Now, here's a piece, I know you've met Cheryl Atkinson, here's a recent piece in the Conservative Treehouse where she makes the excellent point, we shouldn't be settling on just focusing on the 2015-16 cycle.
Yeah.
We need to go back and don't let the Obama and Bush holdovers, don't let them distract us with a right-left discussion over the 2015-16 election. We need to go back, I would argue, to September 11th, 2001, or even further back, but let's start with September 11, 2001 and ask, did it really make sense to surrender rights that we hold dear under the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights to faceless bureaucrats who are going to lock us into perpetual wars that enrich donors but harm this country by piling tremendous debt, financial debt on it, and also damaging our relations around the world? That is not a program that we should be on. History shows us 18 years of this. It has not worked very well. Yeah. I mean, and so this is a great piece that really concentrates more on the Obama era, but I would urge people to go further back And in the Obama era, Atkinson believes she was surveilled, illegally surveilled.
Well, not only does she believe that, she's presented pretty compelling evidence that that actually happened.
That she's suing, I believe,
Yes.
as well. So I don't think that, I know I'm not comfortable leaving behind a world in this country, or a country, where technology gets ever more powerful. People get dumbed down and numbed into the idea of just giving away their whereabouts, their inclinations, to Silicon Valley and other entrepreneurs who monetize your property for their benefit, and then turn over the connections that they have on you to our government so that you can live in a police state run by a one-party system. That's not something I signed up for. I don't think that's something that the founders said. It's something that maybe people in academia are very comfortable with, because most universities are one-party states.
Well, they're communists anyway.
Exactly, but this has got to stop. And I think Atkinson makes some excellent points. Now, I promised to mention just a few things about Australia here. I was watching, thanks to our good friend Michael Smith, and there's a lot of good press about this. This is just very similar. What happened just recently in Australia overnight is quite similar to what happened in 2016 in America, in that the know-it-all pundits were saying that because the left in Australia had made the election all about climate change, that the existing leadership and the conservatives in it were going to be trashed and were going to be thrown out of office, and that didn't work so well for them at all. So
I wonder to what extent, Charles, also the people in Australia might be looking at the recent events in New Zealand. I think you know that New Zealand is sort of the New Jersey to Australia's New York. They're sort of connected in that way, but like New Zealand is, you know. But I think a lot of people, I don't know what the gun rights are in Australia. I don't think they're anything like in the United States, or maybe not even as liberal as what New Zealand was. But that gun grab in New Zealand after the mosque shooting was pretty chilling for people who are Second Amendment rights supporters.
Yeah, I don't know Australian history. I've never actually been to Australia or New Zealand, but I do know this.
I can't believe there's two places I've been to that you have.
There you go. There you go. But the thing about Australia, I believe it was sort of founded as a colony where you sent prisoners there, so it probably wouldn't have been the smartest move to say, let's enshrine gun rights, whereas the U.S. is a different story.
True.
So also, you probably may or may not have seen this Austrian development, but unfortunately somebody in the vice chancellor had to resign over being, somebody live streamed him or videoed him, you know, discussing with people how he could be bribed and what he wanted from a Russian oligarch's help. Unfortunately, this is an Austrian far-right guy. He had to resign. It's resulted in, suddenly resigned. You know, when the Clintons do it, it's like, that's why you should vote for us. But this guy resigns. And it means that there will be snap elections called.
Wow. And you know, it's funny, in other Austrian news, somebody drop-kicked Arnold Schwarzenegger in South Africa.
Yeah, I don't understand
why they did that.
Why you would run that risk and why they did it.
Well, the guy got immediately beaten up by Schwarzenegger bodyguards who didn't seem amused by the stunt.
So this next one, this sex cult. This story, now this is from, I don't know what the Frank report is, and I don't know how reliable
Frank
it
and
is.
Beans report. What is going on with Stormy Daniels?
Yeah, well, this is a story, if true, that is quite stunning, actually. This is not, it's not, somebody sent it to me, a good loyal viewer sent it to me, it's dated, it came out March 11th. But this sex cult scandal is quite noteworthy in that part of the testimony, they're alleging that the Bronfmans, who are a rich Canadian family, a Canadian and American family, basically allowed their money to be sent to the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign through followers of this sex cult. Now, that's a very serious offense, you know, if you want to take our laws seriously. But the number of people who were supposedly seen at some party in 2007 together, you know, it's quite something. And that these type of cults would continue to exist in this day and age. By the way, who is Allison Mack?
actress from Smallville who looks like the most regular kind of like, you know, picket fence kind, you know.
I wonder if she's the daughter of the Morgan Stanley former chairman, John Mack.
I don't know.
Well, anyway, we hear Uma Abedin. You know, and it talks about the number of people who are here, and then a whole collection of supposed college students, you know, getting together.
This is a very important comma right here, Charles, because he's still disgraced, but he's the former New York Attorney General.
A dozen or more college women.
Oh.
You know, college. I'm sure they check those ideas very carefully.
Right.
So this is not an area that I consider myself to be expert in, but I notice around the Clintons and around these scummy politicians, they're just seeing whether it's Epstein, this thing, Weinstein, you know, it's just everywhere. And if you're trying to think, and this is a 15-year-old, Catherine Oxenberg, and I think her daughter was then 15-year-old. What the hell was she bringing a 15-year-old daughter to a party?
To a sex cult party?
Yeah, I mean, it's
who
probably not
brought
as
the 15-year-old?
some of this Catherine
daughter?
Catherine Oxenberg.
Wow, that's pretty
Weird.
outrageous.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Unless that's how she grew up, which is also weird.
Right. That's like the cyclical nature of abuse, right? I don't even know who this person, Catherine Oxenberg, is.
She's an
looking right
actress.
at her.
Another actress.
Hollywood's a weird place, Charles.
Yeah.
Gotta watch out for those sex cult parties.
But I think, you know, we have talked about it in the past that the Epstein case is still out there and being examined from new angles. You went and interviewed, who was
Dershowitz.
it? Dershowitz on the steps of that courthouse. But
many people actually noted that he had some kind of issue with his eye. He has like maybe only one functional eye, and that would make it 50% easier to lie to somebody.
Oh, that's probably true, yeah.
Right? Because you can't see it in their eyes.
So I put this in for your benefit in a way. It's really amazing that here Julian Assange, who has irritated a lot of people around the world, but to date, as far as I know, not a single one of the stories coming out of WikiLeaks has been proven wrong, which you can't say that about the New York Times. I mean, it's their batting ratio is very different. And we live in a world where you're going to say, it's okay, Julian Assange should rot in prison in the UK. You know, we have a special relationship with the UK. We should allow this to happen, as the UK is trying to convince people that they're not completely stupid on this Brexit thing. You know, we have a lot of leverage over the UK at this minute. We should allow Julian Assange to rot in prison while Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton go around with Chelsea Clinton collecting speaking fees, talking about the good old days when they were ripping off the world. I mean, just there's something badly wrong with a media that would give a forum, corporate media, give a forum to Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton, allow them to enrich themselves, and then not cover this Assange story the way they should be up in arms over what's going on here. To say he's Martin Luther King is a little bit much.
With that is what I was going to ask. I mean, it's also interesting to note that when a rogue terrorist arms dealer, namely Jamal Khashoggi, got chopped up, everybody was all upset about what they're doing with journalists. That guy's not actually even a journalist, he's a terrorist. But Julian Assange, who's never pointed an RPG at anyone as far as we know, he's in jail and they all think that's great.
That's great, yeah.
You know, people were applauding at that crazy Clinton thing when they talked about Julian Assange. That, like, when I went there, that piece that I've got up on Patreon that people can take a look at, people were applauding when Hillary Clinton said that, you know, he mishandled classified information, he should be in jail. I mean, it was just the most brazen thing you could imagine.
So speaking about the Clintons, which we do from time to time, here what we're going to do is get a little bit more into some details and give you, I hope, the audience some comfort that pressures are really, really mounting here. So the original Horowitz report confirmed, we know that from January 2016, there were multiple investigations opened by the FBI into the Clinton Foundation in January of 2016. We've covered this before. Why is that significant? When the FBI opens an investigation, the operations guide suggests there are all kinds of records. All right, so the FBI should be able, Barr and a new team should be able to direct folks to go back over the ground, January 2016, what were the line agents who were involved in this looking at? What frustrations did they encounter? Who may have stopped them from pursuing this? Why did they do that? And that's just the first investigation. There was another one that may have started in 2009. We know there was one that was between 2001 and 2005. That entire record needs to be, to satisfy me, I would want to see that whole record. I want to understand why you couldn't convict these people in 2002, early in 2002.
That record is James Comey's greatest hits.
Well, one thing that I only noticed until recently is that Bob Mueller was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States from January 20th, 2001 for a number of months. So
Mueller was the Deputy Attorney General.
Right, briefly. And then he had a several-month hiatus, and then he became head of the FBI on September 4th, 2001. So I would want to go back over all that ground. I would want to know, and I assume that Durham and people are doing this now, you know, dopey James Comey gets up in July and says no reasonable prosecutor would go after Hillary Clinton. Who was responsible for dopey James not seeing the evidence that was provided by the senior state? Has anyone gone talk to the senior state official?
You know, it's making me think that Three Stooges video where James Comey has his eyes closed is more appropriate than I realized at the time.
Right. That's in January 2016. So you have 6 months of an FBI investigation open into Hillary Clinton mishandling beginning July 10th, 2015. This guy or woman walks in. Where's the evidence? Then there are a lot of stories, but the one that burst on the scene May 7th was this story that I did that made it into Zero Hedge, where a lot of attention began to go into focus on the Clinton Foundation. And I went down, I'm not going to say with whom, but I went to a media group for 2 days, late May, early June 2016, with about 25 people, took everybody through what I had seen and why I thought it was important. And one person said at the time, who's a famous person, said that if what I'm saying is true, it's the largest political scandal in American history. That's when, that was made known to a large number of people then, and as I guess it filtered into Washington, D.C., and people were probably saying, we better make sure nobody focuses on this, because if they do, our plot to rig the 2016 election is not going to work too well.
Right.
So I go in, and I had been in discussion with people at CNN, the top investigators who were based in Atlanta, and I sent them many emails. I save all my emails, so I still have them. And out of that, arose an opportunity to sit down with Jake Tapper. I was asked before I did that to ask any question that I wanted to be asked of the Clinton Foundation, and they would do that. So I sent them.
Ask them what you want them
Jake
to
Tapper's producer said, "You give us any question you want us to ask the Clinton Foundation, and we'll do that for you." So that sounds good. So gave him a whole bunch of questions by email. Come down to the meeting, and this very nice young producer, very nice person, says, "Well, before we get saving you some of the story, before you get started, we just want to let you know that the Clinton Foundation is surprised because they told us that we have answered all of Mr. Ortel's questions to his satisfaction."
But you've never communicated with them at all?
No. And so I told that to the producer. She's like, "Huh?" Because she probably was the one who had been interacting with the Clinton Foundation and had been lied to. And, Tapper and I talked. We were supposed to be only 15 minutes on air. We're going to do a special, on charity fraud, not just on the Clinton Foundation. The thing went for like 45 minutes. I made a lot of points to him. Never was like, crickets.
So
he probably
they cut it. They never aired it, right?
They never, no, not 1 second. And as a guest, they probably just sent the demo tape to the Clintons as a guest. So that's early June, 1st or 2nd of June 2016. The tarmac meeting is June 27th, 2016 in Phoenix. And I don't think that Bill unexpectedly showed up in a baking hot building, to talk to Loretta Lynch as equals. I think it was like, listen, Lynchy, Hillary's going to be the next president. You might want to check and see what happens to people who oppose us. And there's a good way you can live your life under the Hillary Clinton presidency, and then you could screw around with us, and that won't work for you. Because we're going to win.
You just reminded me that this meeting took place in Phoenix. So was it Sky Harbor Airport?
I don't know whether there's a different private airport. I don't know. It's we can figure it out. But.
Sky Harbor is pretty small, and if it is the same airport, it's probably worth noting that that is also the airport where the 19 alleged hijackers, at least Mohammed Atta and his crew, entered the system at Phoenix Sky Harbor.
Really?
Interesting.
Very interesting, yeah. So Comey then clears early in July, clears Hillary Clinton. Now, that's just completely wrong. It's like, what Mueller did with this, this latest 448-page nonsense report that shouldn't have been public. It should have been kept private. And certainly, it shouldn't have included statements of, we didn't decide to indict, but that doesn't mean we exonerated him either. That's not the standard of justice in America, that you're only fine unless the Justice Department exonerates you. You're innocent until proven guilty. It is the duty of the Justice Department to decide to indict, and then it is the duty of the Justice Department's prosecution team to convince juries that you're guilty beyond whatever standard is required, and then you can talk trash after you. But before then, you absolutely must say this person is an indictment is an assertion. The defendants are innocent until proven guilty. You've got to make that plain, and they didn't. And similarly, the head of the FBI, in no way, shape, or form, had the right to go up and trash Hillary Clinton the way he did. This careless, that mistake, this. But no reasonable prosecutor is going to. So, of course, no reasonable prosecutor, understanding that Hillary Clinton's going to be the next president of the United States and hoping to remain alive, would prosecute her. So, this when you start going back over this chain, and you start liberating the people who have been hiding what really happened by saying, we want you to come forward. The people who come forward first will be treated. If you were pushed into doing something you shouldn't have done, leniency will be applied. Okay, if you wait, we're going to figure out the truth. This guy Durham, they should call him Bull Durham. I mean,
they are calling it that.
Around the same time frame, the brave, now Senator, but then Representative Marsha Blackburn sends letters around saying, what the hell's going on with this Clinton Foundation? And she gets dismissive responses, and that causes a furor. So ultimately, the IRS chief confirms mid to late July 2016, there was also an IRS investigation of the Clinton Foundation, in addition to the 2 FBI investigations. So we have at least three files, it could be more than 2, plural investigations into the Clinton Foundation. To be conservative, we'll say 2. 1 IRS investigation. Okay, what do those files show us? And then Marsha Blackburn's people, I issue a report, but also Marsha Blackburn's people issue a very lengthy report into the public domain. Trump wins, and we have 3 rounds after Trump won in 16, 17, and 18 of the Clinton Foundation and its various affiliates filing materially false federal tax returns, materially false state tax returns, materially false international tax returns, and in addition to that, compounding it all, we have a raft of crazy auditing firms, some not so well known and some very well known, signing off on manifestly illegal reports to all these different governments of a charity that I would argue, as we're going to see in a second, never actually existed. So there's a lot of ground for people to go over here. So this report that I did back in 2000, I think it's 16, where I highlight for people, if you want to think through charity fraud in its essence, it's very simple. Did the thing exist legally? Yes or no? If it didn't exist, nothing it did afterwards will atone for the grave sin of failing to be an organization. You either are an organization or you're not, okay? And that's if you fail that test, at any point in time, the IRS has an absolute right to go back and say, yeah, you weren't an organization at the time you applied for federal tax exemption. You just weren't, okay? And you provided no proof. But why did this happen? Why was it allowed to happen? A certain Bill Clinton was in deep shit in October 23rd, 1997. He knew, his people around him knew, the Monica Lewinsky thing was bubbling up to the surface, the Paula Jones trial was case was coming back, and he had no money. He was in debt to his lawyers. They were antsy to be paid. He needed to have a vehicle to raise money to pay off his lawyers and to get himself out of, and to fight what could have been coming, what did come, which was impeachment. Okay? So in the public domain, I've now had almost 4.5 years to search through the public domain. And I can tell you there's more than enough information in the public domain, multiple sources, that Bill Clinton, starting probably before he won, but certainly in the month after he won in 1992, in December of 1992, Bill Clinton was already hard at work thinking through how to monetize his library, his presidential library. It hadn't been created yet, but how to use a presidential library as a way to protect his legacy, but more importantly, to use it as an engine to redevelop Little Rock for the benefit of his political patrons, his wealthy patrons in Little Rock. Little Rock back then, the site where this library ultimately was built was blighted. It was a riverfront blighted neighborhood that was, bringing the values and the city down. And so he knew, being a denizen of Little Rock, having been governor for as many terms as he was, he knew, he's not stupid, and they were in the real estate development business. And they knew
Whitewater.
They knew that
they
if
were
you
in the crooked real estate business for years.
That's one of the bedrock principles of the Clinton fortune, is making money in dirty real estate deals. So they knew that if they spent some time figuring out where to site this library, that they could coax donors to send money their way, and ultimately make a nice big fancy deal of claiming that they were spending a lot of money on this library, but stealing as much of it as possible. So there are a lot of activities that should have been disclosed to the IRS prior to the creation, the incorporation of this mess on October 23rd, 1997. None of these activities, which are, again, in the public domain and will be in my book, are disclosed on the form. It's a disqualifying factor right away. If you've been doing this as a loose association, a working task group, and making commitments in the name of an organization that doesn't exist, you're committing fraud when you do that. So they incorporated an entity called the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, but that, as it turns out, is not the same as organizing. If you incorporate, all you're doing is you're just typically getting lawyers to get ready to take the various steps that need to be taken to actually create an independent organization that's independent from you, it's independent from me, it's over here, it's got to be independent. So they didn't do that. On the 7th of November 1997, lots of stories about this, lots of records in the city of Little Rock and elsewhere, that Bill and Hillary Clinton tell this placeholder president, Skip Rutherford, and who's involved with a marketing firm promoting the redevelopment of Little Rock, they tell Rutherford that they have selected a portion of a site in Little Rock that they ultimately did use as their site selection. And the problem with that is Bill and Hillary Clinton were not named in any way as being connected to this entity, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. Individuals don't have the power to direct a corporation to which they have no tie as a director or age or whatever, no written tie. You don't have the right to do that. And the fact that you've done it and bragged about it proves that it's not independent, right? This thing is nothing more, was nothing more at the time than a vehicle for Bill and Hillary to collect, launder, and squander dirty money in the name of possibly setting up some kind of library, okay? Then through the 22nd of December 1997, again, there's too many examples for my book. So the way I'm setting this thing up is to select the choice ones and then have case studies and exhibits, because scholars will be interested in this over time. But there are so many examples of malfeasance in the name of various entities which are not the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, but sound like it, the dupe, in quotes, people across the world that, this Clinton team has the right to set this thing up and this thing is really existing. But they wait until the 23rd of December to apply for this federal employee identification number, which is a crucial thing that you need to prove that you have an organization.
And
If
open
you don't,
bank accounts and stuff
yeah,
like
you
that.
can't. And none of this.
Insurance and everything.
Right. So all of this time frame from the 23rd of October '97 to the 23rd of December 1997, which is 62 days, I think, if you count both endpoints, they're operating without this crucial data. It's like operating without a social security number.
Charles, is there any truth to the rumor that your book will be longer than Lord of the Rings?
The book series. No, because I'm going to. Well, I'm thinking of doing it at 3 different books, but with supporting exhibits. But it's going to be a lot longer than Lord of the Rings, counting exhibits actually.
Lord of the. Well, we've already used that.
Yeah. So on the same day, in theory, bylaws are adopted. Now, bylaws for a corporation, for people who are not familiar with this, the Articles of Incorporation should lay out and comply with the state statute. If you're you're creating this thing in a state, you got to meet the state statute. We're going to introduce you to that in a second. There are certain things you have to do in the Articles of Incorporation, but you can't manage the affairs of a corporation without bylaws. And if you haven't adopted them,
It's in that book when you get the EIN,
right?
isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's the way you do things. There's certain you build a house in a certain way, and you set up a corporation in a certain way. So you need employer identification number, you need articles of incorporation, you need bylaws, you need a bank account, you need a physical address. We're going to show you what you need. But of course, the Clinton approach is, fuck that, we don't need any of that. This is going to be what Bill wants to do anyway.
Yeah.
So then this organization, this putative organization, they file an application with the IRS, which is completely wrong. All right, they lie all over this application. They omit crucial defecting information, and they mischaracterize the true purpose of this thing. They don't explain the ties of Bill and Hillary to this. They don't explain that everybody connected into the Clinton Foundation is a partisan hack supporter of the Clinton family. You can't do any of that normally when you set up a public charity that's going to be a presidential archive. This period, October 23rd, 1997 to 31 December 1997, ends. And an organization, an independent organization, has to file a tax return for what is called the short period, in their first short period of the year. They never do that, right? In fact, I don't put this in here. Maybe I do put this in there. Yeah. So they ultimately don't file a return federally or in any state where they should have filed it. That's truthful. They don't, in this period, Charlie Tree, who was raising money using
Chinagate.
Yeah, Chinagate. He had to stop that stuff, and they needed to come up with a second way to raise money. So they have 3 trustees, and they pick one of them, David Pryor, to head up the second legal expense trust, but they don't disclose that in the application for the library. They don't disclose the massive amount of money that Bill and Hillary owed to the lawyers, Williams and Connolly. Now that creates, lawyers tell me, and you don't need expert advice on this, here you have Bill and Hillary in desperate financial shape, in desperate political trouble, millions of dollars of legal fees, and instead of getting, for this presidential library, independent lawyers who could balance the interests of the Clintons against the requirements for operating a foundation properly, they say, no, we're going to use the same firm that the Clintons owe a ton of money, the same firm that is defending the Clintons in the ultimate impeachment trial, the same firm that has resolutely defended the Clinton family forever. That's the firm we're going to employ. And they don't disclose any of these contacts to the IRS because maybe the IRS is in on the game and they know just how crooked these relationships are. Then they also don't disclose the fact that the second independent director, in quotes, independent director, Ann Jordan, Vernon Jordan's wife, they don't discuss any of the connections that Vernon Jordan has to the Clintons, or the fact that Vernon Jordan is having meetings coaching Monica Lewinsky on how to get jobs, how to lie.
What kind of lip gloss to wear.
Exactly. None of that's disclosed. Nonetheless, the glorious IRS decides, Lois Lerner is not yet in the seat, but they decide, sure, this corrupt arrangement sounds fantastic. How else are we going to pay off Williams and Connolly? And I might point out as well that in multiple accounts, the partner, Bob Barnett at Williams and Connolly, is responsible for getting overpriced book deals
Right, and Williams O'Connelly, of course, is where we can find Eric Holder. Oh no, that's
That's
Covington
not,
and
yeah.
Burling, right? Sorry.
Yeah,
But it's one of those type of law firms.
right. But there are references going back into the early 90s, 92, 93, of how Bob Barnett was chairing a team that was going to think through how to handle the presidential records created under Bill Clinton's presidency. None of that's disclosed in any of this stuff. And then in its life is fun, I suppose, moment, there are multiple examples in Michigan and other states in the intervening months here between the 29th of January 1998 and the 15th of May when a tax return was due. Multiple examples of Skip Rutherford and others signing state reform saying, we're not going to give you a report on 1997 because the organization didn't exist in 1997. A strict rule is that only organizations can apply for federal tax exemption. So if the thing didn't exist in 97, it couldn't possibly have applied for federal tax exemption as it did on the 23rd of December, 1997. It's just open and shut. You fail the organization test. But in this case, I'll do it quickly, but there's a lot more to this story. Go to the next page, please. Okay, if we could just make it a little small, yeah. So this is the current Arkansas nonprofit corporation law. It has changed to be more specific than it used to be, but I think the principles are more or less the same. And it says if you want if you want to incorporate, in the Articles of Incorporation, line 6 here it says, you have to put in the number of directors who are on the initial board of directors and the names and addresses of the persons who are to serve as the initial directors. They never did this. Okay? So there's a strong argument, I would argue, that they never actually incorporated. They got, these law firms, one of which, Williams and Connolly, was owed a tremendous amount of money. And so its legal advice, I would argue, is not something I would regard as independent. They wanted to rush this thing into existence because the Clintons were saying, we'll get the money to pay. Just let us get this presidential thing up. We're going to say, whatever we want, and people are going to give us money, and that's how we'll pay your bill, right? So they didn't do this properly, and they may not have at the time have had to do this with this parent entity, but with subsequent entities, they absolutely had to file with the circuit court. This is Pulaski County. This filing, which they never did. As far as I can tell, they never have done. Now, maybe there's a provision in Arkansas law that exempts corporations in Pulaski County itself
that are owned by the Clintons.
Yeah, from doing this. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trying to pretend that I am one, but I just read what the law says, and the Articles of Incorporation to me seem deficient. Now, then we look at the current standard here in red. If you go down the page a little bit. The circuit court has to say that the Articles of Incorporation conform to law. They don't. And they also the circuit court, an independent body in theory, has to say the incorporation is for a lawful purpose and also in the best interest of the public, which it certainly isn't. So I want to, if they didn't say this, that's a problem. If they did say this, I want to understand who did say it. And certainly people, say, in the FBI office in Little Rock could figure this out very quickly.
Very quickly is already passed.
Right. So if we go to the next page. So here are some Arkansas laws that are interesting concerning audits and numbers. In the first instance, this is again current Arkansas law, which I think did apply back then. You have to keep correct books and records. Sort of.
It's a drag, Charles.
I know. And you have to account for things, it says, according to accepted accounting principles, not, Clintonomics, not, whatever fattens Hillary's fat purse. This is not, you got to follow, as a general matter for a corporation, you got to keep books and records, financial books and records of the proceedings of the board meetings and committees. You got to keep these records, okay? But you also have to get audits of your financial statements if your revenues are greater than $500,000 a year back in 1998, okay? So you have to get audits. There are no audits for this entity, okay? We've been through this before, but they did not file a tax return for 97. They filed fraudulent tax returns for 98, 99, 2000. None of them were truthful. None of them were complete. None of them, included defects like use of an unregistered fundraising agency that was subsequently prosecuted or disciplined by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or the fact that they solicited without filing to solicit in Mississippi 3 times. Okay, along the way, and in other states, we haven't been through every single state, but there are a lot of examples of malfeasance. They tell the IRS in the body of these financial statements that they were indeed audited, but they weren't. They name an auditor before they change their name to BKD. And I put them down for 97 because in a certain schedule, you have to fill out information about 1997, which they did in 98 and 99, 2000, 2001, and 2002, I believe, all of which was false.
It's amazing.
And then this is now, I apologize, this is wonkiness, but there's the accounting standard that did matter back then is something called SFAS 117, and you're asked on the form, are you following SFAS 117, which you have to follow if you're a nonprofit in the United States? And in every case, they say, yep, we are.
Yeah, we don't even know what that is.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, we'll follow that.
Well, let's show you what it is. Okay. Again, the convention we follow here is we're redists. Red is bad. You see a lot of red on a page, that's not good. So this standard, we provided links in the past to it, so we didn't want to clutter the page with a link, but I just excerpt 3 provisions. These are 27 paragraphs or more of the standard, just 3 of them, okay? So a complete set of financial statements, first of all, is for an organization. So before you let any accountant do any work, you got to ask the potential client, or the client has to say, I am indeed an organization. Here's the proof. Here are my articles of incorporation. Here's my EIN. Here are my bylaws. Here's this and that. You don't do financial statements in not-for-profit land for individuals, for notions, for initiatives, for slogans, only for organizations, okay? And it has to include a balance sheet, they call it a statement of financial position, an income statement, they call that a statement of activities, and a statement of cash flow, which they never do until 2006, when they do it for 2004 and 5. But they don't do anything for 97, no statements of cash flows, which is a crucial thing. When you're running a business, I actually focus on the balance sheet and the cash flow statement, less the income statement. Cash flow statement tells you what happened to my cash. And that's what you should really care about, because with a cash flow statement, you can say, my opening cash balance was in these 45 accounts, my closing is in these 75 accounts. You can add them up and you can see the differences, and there's a problem if the cash flow statement doesn't fit with the balance sheet. And it just tells you a lot more interesting information. So the Clintons, of course, in this period, their people say, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do cash flow statements, and more importantly, the footnotes to a set of financial statements for people like me are very important. They give you all the fine nuances. What's in the footnotes is almost as less important than what footnotes aren't there. If you're experienced and you know something is material and it should have been covered in a footnote and there's no footnote, you know there's a serious problem. So just a cursory reading, we've been at this explanation for less than 3 minutes. You would know if you knew what you were doing. There's no audit, there's no tax filing in 97. Once you get to the stuff that is provided, it doesn't comply with just paragraph 6 as SFAS, so it's totally non-compliant. You got to focus on paragraph 18, the organization as a whole. What I think was really going on here is the stuff in Arkansas was a notion, it was a figment of activity. The real action was going on in Washington, D.C., most likely in Hillary's office in the White House. The only insiders, Bill, Hillary, Cheryl Mills, others, were expanding their Lincoln bedroom program and their other solicitation.
What's
White
the
House,
Lincoln bedroom?
well,
renting
it out
people?
to get political contributions. They say, well, we can do this. There are limits on political contributions. You can only get, but for charities, there's no limit. We could charge what we want, by way of a contribution to this. So why don't we commence marketing from our Washington, D.C. base, but not bother to actually organize anything in Washington, D.C., and I think that's exactly what they did.
And wasn't Charlie Tree one of the guys who was having all kinds of weird access to the White House?
Absolutely.
And other Chinese generals and
John
stuff,
Wang and all these people, right. This was what was going on here. Remember, this is why a charity has to be an organization, so that you can't do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You want to say you're a charity, you got to say, all right, fine, organize in a state. If you're going to operate in Washington, D.C., register as a foreign charity in Washington, D.C., foreign in the sense that you're not organized in Washington, D.C. originally. They didn't do that. So they broke 6, they broke 18, and then you have this question of program services, and it's specifically defined. Activities that result in goods and services being distributed to beneficiaries that fulfill the purposes or mission for which the organization exists. So you can't create a charity that's supposed to only do work in Little Rock, and then the bills come rolling in, and you say, well, I got to go to Europe. So I'm going to call my trip to Europe a program expense fighting HIV/AIDS. You can't do that without changing your articles of incorporation, notifying the wider world as you're soliciting, that in fact, you're going to be doing more than just being a presidential archive and research facility in Little Rock. Now, in terms of what they declared for program services expenses in 1998, the first full year of operations, they said, we spent no money on that.
That's awesome.
That's their declaration. But rather than spending money on that, we had David Pryor, one of 3 independent directors, in theory, trustees of the Clinton Foundation, run this thing called the Presidential Legal Expense Trust, which declared the magical program service expense of exactly $2.6 million. Now,
that's the bill to the law firm.
It's probably a bill. They probably paid off the law firm and said that's
done.
That's done, But the magic round number. First of all, the Presidential Legal Expense Trust is not a charity, but they filed as a charity in Maryland. We have emails back and forth from the people in Maryland saying this isn't a charity.
Yeah, that's one of the most brazen things they've done. Just start a charity to pay his legal bills for raping women.
Right, exactly. So this is 98.
Not cool at all.
Remember, 98 is a very dangerous year. You have midterm elections. You have Bill gets indicted, impeached at the end of the year. It's not clear that you're going to win the acquittal in the Senate. You're in deep trouble. Your lawyers are pissed. You need money. Nothing suspicious at all about having the thing where this tax deductible declare very few donations and in theory be a charity but not be organized, and this legal expense trust be operated by an overlapping director, somehow scare up $2.6 million. Okay, in '99 they only declare $29,000 in program services. Well, how could you have programming services of any kind in Little Rock? There's no building. There's nothing's been raised. You can't even start construction. Your lawsuits right and left. How could you say that you spent anything on program services? There's no justification for that. And again, in 2000, he's still the president. They say they spent $80,919 on program services. So when people, this is the trick part that I'm now going to reveal. When people who are not good with numbers might get presented a financial statement, and they'll look at it and they'll say, well, these numbers are all, they're not round, they're different amounts. That must be right.
Must be real, right?
Must be real, right? Because it's not like this number is 10 million, then 2 million, or whatever. It's this round, that round, whatever. You look at it, so obviously this must be the product of somebody, just figuring out how much money was spent on program services. It wasn't just invented,
right?
Okay. On the other hand, this magic thing called percentages. If you happen to go look at a financial statement and you say, you know what, why didn't I take a look at the percentage allocation? Now, how much were program services as a percent of the total? How much was this element of program services as a percent? If it ends up being exactly the same percent for every single category, what really happened is somebody just said, all right, we're going to say the revenues were this, we're going to steal this much in revenue. Now we've got to deal with the expenses. We're just going to take the same percentage of each category and say that that percentage was what was actually spent. Now, do you think the Clintons did this lawfully with no accountants, not organized? Or do you think they used the percentage method?
I'm thinking the percentage method, or
good
you
guess.
wouldn't be talking
Let's
about
go to the tape. All right, so this is the first step here is to compare in 1998, how much money did they say the charity took in, And how much money did they say the legal expense trust took in, right? You add them together, 6.8 million roughly. 45% of the contributions went to the charity, 55% went to the legal expense trust, in theory, right? Program services, which is the gauge when the IRS really works on a charity, when they do, as Lois Lerner did when they went after Tea Party conservatives.
It's exactly the same.
Well, no, here they spent nothing on program services in 1998 in the charity, and all of it
Got it.
was at the legal expense trust. So the first test, one of the tests the IRS looks at when they're trying to figure out should you go to jail for this kind of stuff is, you typically are not really engaged in charitable activities unless you spend money on program services.
Right.
So here they spend nothing on program services. They have nobody in March 12th, 1998 in Little Rock. One person, March 12th, 1999. The one out of the three directors is spending time raising money for this presidential legal expense trust without explaining that to the IRS. This is a taxable operation.
Yeah.
40% of the management, the overhead costs of the combined entity is charged to the foundation, 60% to this thing. 100% of fundraising is charged to this. The number of donors to the charity in a year when Bill Clinton is fighting impeachment, there's midterm elections, the number of people who are said to give money to the charity are exactly 3.
Whoa.
That's highly credible, right? You wouldn't have tried to raise money for this charity, which would allow your donors to take a tax exemption. You wouldn't have done any kind of fundraising appeal for that during 1998 in a year where you're fighting for your political life and you're fighting for your financial health. I call mega bullshit. And then there are, for the Presidential Legal Expense Trust, there are letters and summaries which suggest that thousands of donations went into the Presidential Legal Expense Trust in 1998. Okay? So you look at this at surface level, and the numbers, for a numbers guy, 45%, kind of like, seems to be a lot of places, 45%. So then we go into 1999. Let's take a look and see what happens in 1999. We don't have figures for the Presidential Legal Expense Trust, but we do have expense figures, other figures, here are the key expense figures for the charity in 99. The amounts are all slightly different here. They spend in total $291,840. And then I have done, the tax form puts the amount out that they allocated to programs, the amount to overhead, the amount to fundraising in the tax form. I changed it. I said, instead of showing the amounts, let's show the percentages. So programs, all the categories got 10%, whether it's telephone, supplies, whatever. They just took the total and I said, we'll put 10% into programs, 45% into overhead, 45% into fundraising. These are cooked numbers.
No one will notice.
Yeah, no one will know, but these are totally cooked numbers, right? The likelihood
of it happening that way for everything is 0.
Yeah, so they took the total pile.
Statistical impossibility.
Yeah, they just said, what the hell, we'll just, we got to fill this form out, nobody's checking, Gore's going to be president. This form goes in after Gore loses, right, there's a delay, so it's not filed until November 2010. But you look at this right away, and as a numbers person, you say, this is mega bullshit. And it's also mega bullshit because there's no amount spent shown for accounting, right?
Well,
you can't.
You get what you pay for when it comes to the accounting.
The accounting profession has set it up nicely that if you need an accounting opinion, if the law says you have to have an opinion, and the law does say in Arkansas that you need an opinion, the accountant can't give it to you for free because he's not independent if he does that.
What if he's working with a tiger?
Oh, with a tiger, you can't do that. But I mean, this is just, you look at this and right away you say, fraud. This is not the truth. How could you have had 10% of all these categories go into program expenses for a facility that wasn't built, for a facility where construction had not started? How do you magically decide that 10% of all this stuff goes into programs and exactly 45% into overhead, exactly 45%? It's just you didn't want to fill the form out. You couldn't do any accounting.
They're like lazy criminals.
Lazy criminals, right. So then we go into 2000, the report for 2000. Now this is when the crack team
was busy smoking crack.
Well, this is when the crack team of Mueller is involved when a decision is made to open an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Crack Comey is put in charge of it for U.S. Attorney of Southern District, and Rosenstein's in the tax department deciding, the Justice Department deciding which frauds get prosecuted. And there, the 2009-90 isn't turned in to the IRS until after this investigation starts. Remember, we talked about the likelihood of all these numbers being round. So here are the actual numbers they turn in. Numbers guys would look at this and say, wait, there's no accounting fee. There should be accounting fees here. And they spent nothing on postage and shipping. Now, why is that important, Jason? Postage and shipping.
Because they're doing fundraising and they'd have to mail a lot of stuff?
And who was running in a Senate primary campaign and who was running in a Senate general election in 2000?
Hillary.
Hillary Rotten Clinton.
And they mail stuff all the time from those kind of campaigns.
Right. So they claim in the front portion of the tax
Why
form.
would they be so stupid as to leave that out?
They assume that they had.
Like, who actually filled this in? Do we know? Who made
the person who signed it, I think, is Skip Rutherford, from memory, the president.
So the moral is, don't trust somebody named Skip.
Yeah, unless you want peanut butter.
Yeah.
but so you look at this and you say, all right, they just simply said we're going to put all of the employment costs into overhead. Legal fees, we'll just arbitrarily say 25%, 50% in overhead, 25%, and then we'll put all the other stuff in overhead, except for this other. Now, one of the things that I really don't like when somebody lays out expenses, you've got $1 million in expenses, $1,058,000 in expenses. The other category should never be an overwhelming majority of the total, right?
There's a reason. More categories if it's that way.
Right. It's just, so they probably thought, well, this will look as if it's a real thing because programs are 7.55% and overhead 17.96% and fundraising 70%. People will think that this isn't cooked because those percentages are weird.
It's too random, yeah.
So let's go to the next page.
The next page.
All right, this is a breakdown of this 856, the other number, right? And we see that they're up to their usual tricks. Registration fees, they say they didn't register in any state in the body of the tax reform, but somehow they pay $4,000 on registration fees, 100% in fundraising. Consulting fees, now who are those consultants, I wonder? They allocate them. Insurance, 100% to overhead. Direct mail, now direct mail should include postage.
Yes.
Right, and there was a line for postage in the main form. They say 100% of that's fundraising. 25% of the event cost is programs, 70. Again, they just allocate everything else, and you get to the blended number, because the amounts are different, and because of this consulting thing, you get to a number that at surface level looks right, but they're up to the usual tricks. They're just allocating, and what they're trying to hide is the following. The direct mail is in statement 2, 514,823, that's a real number. A bill to a professional fundraising firm, O'Brien, McConnell, and Pearson, is 255,007. We don't have their, at least I haven't seen their engagement letter for 2000, but we have their engagement letter for 2001, which shows that they don't pay for postage.
What do you mean?
Well, so
as part of their deal. For
as part of that, you don't want to you want to have to shell out a lot of money for postage
Right.
and then seek reimbursement for the client. So you say to the client, you got to do that.
They pay for postage.
And mail fraud is a very serious matter. So
Yeah.
mail fraud, when you use, as a charity back then, you got discounted mailing rates for being a charity. You didn't pay what the normal person might pay for your mailers. So
Even what the abnormal person might pay.
So this figure, we're trying to get at how much money may have been spent on postage. We take the O'Brien, McConnell, Pearson fee out. We take the Peter O'Keefe as an individual who's a political fundraiser. We know that from Terry McAuliffe's book and the public domain. He gets paid $112,500. The residual is $147,316, which I would argue is probably intentionally hidden, discounted postage that this fraud should not have had access to. And in the middle of a political campaign, both primary and general election, if you're using the charity to mass mail to gain support for your campaigns,
Election fraud.
that is massive fraud. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest that that's exactly what they may have done, right? So this is, what we're examining here are just the period 97, 98, 99, 2000, the glory years. Bill's president, Hillary's on a track eventually to be president, to be in the Senate. This is 3+ years of non-compliant, false, materially misleading tax filings in the federal level, state level, not yet international, screwed up, no audits. Is this a problem? Is this a problem? Okay. So what I did here is I just took a few subsections of the current law concerning solicitation fraud in Arkansas alone. Now bear in mind, when you solicit, the question would be, where were these mailings going out from? If they were going out from Washington, D.C., which is probably where they went out, not from Arkansas, if they were doing this from an unregistered office in Washington, D.C., or an unregistered office in Arkansas, sending these type of solicitations out only in Arkansas, these are the laws that sections of the laws that you'd be breaking. I would think we're going to spend a little time in this short period of time on it. You're not allowed, a person being an individual or an organization, you can't make a misrepresentation, either a bold-faced misrepresentation, express one, or an implied misrepresentation. You can't do that.
This is just Arkansas?
This is Arkansas law only. So this is
almost any charity law is going to say you can't lie to people to raise money.
Right. Yeah, and then the organization, you can't engage in financial transactions, borrowing money from two banks, on false pretenses, overstating the amount of your presidential library complex so that you could scam more money personally or for a political campaign in 2004. You can't do that. If you knowingly jeopardize or interfere with accomplishing your charitable purpose. Now I suppose you could try to say with a straight face that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are so stupid, and they didn't meet at Yale Law School, they weren't at one point members of the bar, they haven't been elected officials, they're so stupid they wouldn't understand that when you use a charity, public charity, as a vehicle to enrich your family and support political campaigns, making false applications for bank loans and other financial assistance and soliciting around the world illegally, that might jeopardize your ability to continue this charity. You could try that argument, but it wouldn't work too well, I don't think. Then this idea, we've introduced you to multiple similar sounding names. The law is specific, subsection 6. You can't knowingly use a name that is confusingly similar. All right? You can't, in subsection 8, you can't knowingly make any false or misleading statement required to be filed with the Attorney General. Now that's the state forms, and also the federal form was required to be filed. So you did that. You can't fail to substantially comply with the requirements of the subchapter. You did that. You can't use an unregistered paid solicitor. You did that. You used Peter O'Keefe, and you used this O'Brien, McCollum, Pearson, as the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania matter will demonstrate. And then you got to be crystal clear if you're soliciting from an address that's different than your real address. You've got to make it plain that that's what you're doing. And of course they did. They didn't use the correct name of the foundation in any of these tax filings. They didn't use the proper registered address. They, in short, didn't do anything correctly. Except, if you're in the stealing money business, they may have done that correctly.
Well, I was going to say, at least they're very consistent, so that's good.
So that, my friend...
Oh, that's it?
That's it.
Wow, that was fast this week, Charles.
I was just trying to take people through it. This is a presentation that folks should study if they're interested in this. So read this, consider this at your leisure. This is not... the reason that accountants are brought in to check work is precisely to understand this type of stuff. What a real accounting firm would have done here is they would have gone back to Skip Rutherford, the president, and said, listen, dude, there's no way that your books and records here, that in every one of these disparate expense categories, exactly 10% happen to be spent on programs and exactly 45 and 45 on the other events. There's just no way.
Yeah.
There's no way you could prove that to us. Did you just make this shit up? And he'd probably say, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So Skip Rutherford, but Kevin was in the comments telling us that BKD did this audit.
Well, that's even worse. So Kevin knows what he's talking about, and because he is a good CPA, an accountant is supposed to be independent. In other words, management prepares the financial statements, then the accountant goes in and stress tests and said, oh, okay, that's That's right. We agree with your management's estimate of what your, financial statement, the position was, the activities, the cash flow statement, the notes. We agree with all that, or we disagree, and let's change this and that. If it turns out that the management wasn't capable of doing that, and which is likely because it was busy doing other things, guy wasn't paid anything, and there were no real staff at the time. If it turns out that instead of actually being an auditor, what BKD was doing was was cooking the books for this crooked thing, then you're in a whole new level of hurt, because suddenly aggrieved regulators, aggrieved donors who are going to find out maybe after the fact in certain cases that they have massive tax bills that are 20 years old, they come calling and they say, now wait a minute, we relied on you. We assumed that you actually did an audit here, and we're going to sue you.
Cooking the books.
Cooking the books. You don't want to do that. Especially you don't want to cook them with crack and meth. That doesn't work.
Yeah, especially if the cook is smoking or doing whatever with those various things. Well, Charles, another great presentation. A lot of viewers, which is good. We have people are, it's springtime here in New York, so this is like kind of the nicest time of the year in many ways, and we're very pleased that people are spending their Sundays absorbing some of this information. I do want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth cannot continue without audience sponsorship. So if you find yourself watching each week, please go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a sponsor. Even just $2 a month, $5 a month. It's really less than somebody would pay for one newspaper or one cup of coffee. And if you're watching every week and you want the show to continue, it is very important that you become a sponsor. People can also send sponsorship funds by going to paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth, and sponsors at $10 a month or higher are gonna get the official Sunday with Charles screensaver. People love it. Great to see you, Charles. We'll have another exciting episode next Sunday.
Let's hope.
Well, we will.
Inshallah.
All right, very good. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great afternoon.